Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to the third installation with myself and
Abby. Hello.
um,
It's been a while, Tom.
it has been a while. It's been a while, and we apologize for the long gap between the last conversation and this one. It's been eventful. There's been a pandemic going on. I don't know if you've noticed, and so and so we've been a bit tied up, and so but today we are excited to be with you again. We're going to be tackling this third installation of Race and the Church, continuing the difficult conversations about how the tensions came to be and how we can move forward and understanding each other's stories. We are joined by a fantastic panel. I know there was a big cry from the audience last time to have exactly the same people back. We have done everything that we could to make sure that that would happen. Dr. Val Bernard is not going to be with us. She will, however, be joining us for a really exciting future conversation in a couple of sessions' time. But you'll be really excited about who is going to be on the panel with us in terms of a new member. And so, without further ado, let's bring them all in, and then we can begin. In the meantime, rather share the link with all your friends and your family. Tell your mom, tell your grandma, tell everyone to join in. Let's have a nice chat. Paul, the troublemaker, Adrian, David,
hello,
and none other than Sam Davis. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us today. You all feeling good?
Good.
Yes, thank you.
Paul, why do you look so unsure?
It's been a long week, Tom. It's been a long week.
It's been a long week. I hear you. Well, let's hope the rest of 2020 is better than how it began.
Right.
We can only hope. But to all the people watching, thank you so much for tuning in. Please, we'll give you a couple more minutes to just share the link with all of your peoples on your social media networks. Tell everyone that we are about to begin. Get your snacks, get your popcorn, and we'll start in just a few moments. How's everyone's week been?
Good.
Are we still enjoying furlough or not so much?
No, not so much. I'd
I'm
rather be working.
enjoying mine.
What's that, Sam?
I said I'm enjoying my furlough.
Yeah.
You're on a slightly extended one, a self-inflicted one. It's good to see you all. So we'll begin in 1 minute. I'm seeing the numbers are going up, which is encouraging. So thank you all for joining. Please encourage more to join. Put this in your groups, in your WhatsApp groups. Annoy people the way they annoy you with their constant messages. Olivia, thank you for joining us. Ariane, thank you for joining us. Don, thank you for joining us live from New York. Appreciate all of the support from far and from near. This is going to be a good one. Okay, so we're available on YouTube as well as on Facebook, so just share the link. On YouTube, it's SCC Youth Ministries. On Facebook, of course, again, it's SCC Youth Ministries. So share that with everybody. If they're not available, if they don't have a Facebook account, they can listen in on YouTube. We can see all of your comments, so we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if anything catches your attention, makes you angry, makes you happy, and everything between, share in the comments, and we'll try our best to put your questions forward to the panelists to get a wide range of responses. Abigail, am I forgetting anything?
I think you've got it covered, mate. You've got it
Got
covered.
it covered. Okay, cool. David has dropped off, but we're hoping he will resolve those issues and be back in just a moment. So welcome everybody, and we are going to be tackling this topic again. At the end of the last discussion, there was some feedback that we were using terms and phrases that people weren't entirely familiar with, such as white privilege, such as white fragility, the Pearson package. And so we're just going to begin with a quick definition of those things. We're going to be sharing some reading material that addresses those things in more detail if you're interested in pursuing that topic further and kind of just furnishing your mind with more information about this. But to kick us off for today, I'll hand over to the lovely, the immutable, the one and only Abigail Wright-Stephenson for her to give us a the definitions on privilege and fragility.
I feel like that was like a transition, like on Countdown, where they're giving you the word and all of that jazz.
You have on fragility and privilege.
So white privilege is ultimately the benefit of being white, in as simple as you can put it. It's the basis of one's racial or one's color being able to give them access to positions, power, currency, capital, networks. The spectrum is endless, simply because of their color. And white fragility is the defensiveness or the discomfort that can come from white individuals when they're talking about topics that are around Black individuals, and the the discomfort in that is their kind of apologetic or kind of shrugging off or joking about things that they're just uncomfortable talking about. So that is a very basic overview of white fragility and white privilege.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Abby. We'll go over to Professor Paul Bordeaux to give us a breakdown on the Pearson package, and just give us a very kind of brief understanding as to what it was designed to achieve and what it is.
It's quite interesting because part of the reason why I'm tired this week is because there's been quite a bit of conversations around educating people around some of the reasons why we are where we are. And so, frankly, today, as a Black man, I'm tired because some of those conversations have been going on and on and on. So you'll forgive me, Thomas, if I'm not going to explain in detail what the Pearson package is. I'll give a very brief overview. It was the white Adventists' first foray into dealing with the influx of African Caribbeans over here. It's way more complex than that, but Herbert Griffiths wrote an amazing paper, and it's available online, and everybody should go and read it. That's the way we're going to know how this thing works. Go and read it. It's great. But it was a first foray, and it makes for interesting reading if you're interested.
Perfect, no problem. So it was the first foray of white British Adventism to deal with the influx of Caribbeans and Africans and to address the issue of representation in the leadership.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Sam, if you don't mind, we'll begin with you with the first question. You have been pretty much everything there is to be in our conference. You have been youth director at some point. You have been pastor in the field. You have been president. In all of your years of experience at the decision-making table in terms of policy making, hiring, is the BUC leadership on every level representative of its membership, and should it be? Is it representative, and should it be representative?
I think it is representative. I think it should be representative. But I think that one of the things we ought to be aware of is that the demographics have changed within the BUC, and so the desire or the attempt to be as representative as the church would like to be is not there. So the more you lose certain racial groups, then obviously is the harder it is to ensure that they're represented at the table. But I think that over the years, from my observation, we live in a multicultural, multi-ethnic society, and the leaders have always sought to ensure that we were diverse in the appointments that were made.
And would you say, so when I ask should it be, it may seem like an obvious question, but I'm asking the question, should it be within the context of the pursuit of the best people? So we would like to think, and I assume there is some attempt on some level to ensure that the people who are being hired at every level are the best talent available and the best people to be able to do the work. Do you think there is a risk sometimes when we are so pursuant of representation, especially in further context of the basic vision, what that aims to do, that we begin to compromise on getting the most competent people because we would rather have every face represented at the table? Do you think the two things are mutually exclusive?
Look, I think that you've got to compromise somewhere. You know, you've got to compromise. So let's say we had a situation where we say, let's go and we're just going to choose the best person for the job. Okay. And so the best persons for the job have all been chosen, and they're on the stage at the conference session, and they're all white. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is a stitch up. You know, this is wrong. You know, this can't be, you know, because I'm not represented. You know, and so you may, and then what's the message that's being sent? So you're saying all those guys up there are better than the rest of us. And so, you know, you have to make a compromise and say, you know, when I open the family album, you know, or if I came to your birthday party, Thomas, and I look and I say, well, there's Thomas. The next thing, I'll turn the next page. I want to see where I am, mate, at your party. You know? And so all of us are like that. You know, we can say, where am I represented? And so because of that, you've got to make some compromises, because getting the best person for the job might be the ideal, but it's not going to work. And then the other thing that I would say is this. You can say, we're going to go for the best person for the job. So we're going to choose this guy because he's got his PhD in this area. But guess what? Just because the man's got a PhD in a certain discipline doesn't mean that he's not going to goof up sometime. And then what we're going to say is that what you said is the best you got? You know, no, he's just messed up. You know, and we will all mess up because we are human, we are fallible, and so I think, Thomas, that we've got to make compromises to make sure in a multi-ethnic, cosmopolitan organization, we need to have representation. And that representation may mean a compromise against always getting the best person for the job.
Paul.
That's really lovely. And I felt a bit emotional about that, Sam. Because if that idealistic point of view, which I do get, to be fair, but I think that's a narrative that we have continued to perpetuate for years. And I don't believe that that narrative is one that is representative at all. So what do I mean? If that was a commonly held belief, because I believe you hold that view and I believe that my dad holds that view. But the unfortunate part is, if that was the case, then we wouldn't have had some of the experiences that we have had. Because A, it's not been the best person for the job, because most of the times we've known that. Most of the times there have been times when people have been favored into positions by nothing more than their mates are the ones that's in charge. Third point is that when you look at the nominating committee, we all know how that works. Like, if you get your mates onto it, you know that you can influence how it works. And so I think that while I do hear that, I think there's part of us that also has to be more truthful about the fact that the representation for us is so difficult. However, what we have noticed is over-representation. Now that we can see over-representation, but what we cannot see is simple representation. We can see one here, one there, and so on. Like Dave said the last time, well, you've got a black leader, and that's like, okay, great. But we also know that there is promotions that have been going on for years and years and years that have had nothing to do with representation. in fact, what we've seen is over-representation. So I do hear that point, but I'm just like,
sure.
It's not
Sorry, in terms of over-representation, as I said, you have a situation where the demographics have changed. I'm not going to disagree with you on people being appointed simply because it's convenient, or maybe this person is preferred over another, because even though they may not have the requisite skills. But let me also say, Paul, that I don't think if we all cast our minds back to the guy who was doing the signing at the Mandela funeral and had no idea what he was doing, I don't think I've seen anything that bad. We are, and I'm not suggesting that we are perfect. The suggestion that you made about the nominating committee and it being rigged or fixed or getting your mates on there, that's not a game I've ever played, and I don't believe in that game. I know it happens. I have no interest in it. I've never played it, and I don't think that we should play it. But it does happen because it's an imperfect system. But if you want a perfect system, then we would have to say that God is in charge, and guys, we're gonna, if I come to the nominating committee with my 2 dice and I say, right, we're just gonna pray to the Lord and roll the dice, 1 for Adrian, 2 for Paul, 3 for Abigail, and so on, you're gonna say you've lost your mind. This is ridiculous, because that's not the way we do things now. So we have a democratic system, we have an electoral procedure, and that's what we go through, and we end up with a situation where we have the best that we can to work with. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. None of us are perfect. Will Mr. Perfect please stand up? None of us are perfect, and so we will make mistakes. The system is not perfect, but this is what we've got.
So off the back of that, I want to bring in Adrian, because I know, Adrian, you have some experience in being in the nominating committee and selection committees, and we've heard what does sometimes happen. The whole idea of bringing in your mates, and the whole idea of, I'm on here, if I scratch your back later on, you've spoken about,
Oh.
Sorry, yeah, you've also, of course, yeah, Abigail's also been on the...
You chopped out.
I chopped out.
No, I wasn't even jumping in for that reason. You dropped out, so I was just going to finish off your line saying,
I didn't hear the end of your...
I'll scratch yours.
Am I back in now? Can you hear me properly?
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. So Sam has spoken about, the perfect system will be, God is in charge. And so on some level, we want to speak the rhetoric of God is in charge. In reality, it's a democratic system. In your experience, 2 questions. Is our pursuit of representation hampering our process in some way? Are we losing out on getting the best people? And secondly, how do we live out God is in charge of the selection process in a democratic process, or kind of like a semi-democratic process? How has your experience of being on the selection committee been with respect to those 2 things?
Well, just to address your first question, I think there's a wide set of principles to include in our discussion. So I think it's about representation, meritocracy, inclusion, and equity. And I understand the problem with meritocracy is that without equity, it doesn't work, because the system is biased towards promoting certain people that are privileged in that system. Now, we could have a discussion about what that means in the South England Conference. I don't know, but I understand. So you need, if in an ideal world, we would have equity, and then you could just pursue meritocracy. But then that doesn't answer the question of representation, because it seems to me that the function of the officers at conference level, if that's what we're talking about, is more than just to perform a job. It's to represent their ethnicity. Historically. I think coming back to the process, you hear so many people say, oh, well, they've sorted out the officers before the nominating committee has met. And I do think there is, it would be a good idea to demythologize or make it more transparent than it probably is. At the moment, you get, so I was on the nominating committee at the SEC session last year. You get shoved into a room for a couple of days, high pressure, making decisions about people's life choices and the direction of the conference. And you're doing it on who you know, and you're doing it on what other people think of other people. It's not a robust HR process. And I think, I hear what Sam says. That's the way it is. But I think that leads to this mistrust of the work of the committee, because there isn't that robustness there. I think the BUC last session asked for us, all the pastors, to give out a CV, but at the SEC session, there was no CV. So you're going off what other people think of the candidates for the particular job. What is the the president? I'm not, I'm in favor of Emmanuel, but what is the vision of the president? Where do they see them taking the conference in the next 4 years? What are we choosing you to do?
Come on, talk it.
And I think this is really what we're trying to also give some kind of flesh to, is what is a possible system. What does a possible future system look like that is able to kind of fix some of the issues that we're discussing here? Because as much as we hear you, Sam, about the imperfect system, and of course, yes, it is, it's what we have, is there an appetite to reinvent the system to have a better situation where we can assess the competence of people above and beyond simply what other people think of them, above and beyond simply do we have enough black people in the room? Do we have enough white people in the room? Do we have 2 women where we're supposed to have 2 women? How do we move beyond that to have a more robust HR system? That's open. Sorry, Sam, you're muted.
Sorry.
Continue.
Has somebody muted me? Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. So I think that what we need to try and avoid is to bringing this into the realm of politics, because if you change the current system, and this is what I've said before, whatever you do, because it's human, it's flawed. So if we change it to everybody giving out their CVs, Paul, did you get my CV, mate? I sent it to you by email last night. Just it becomes very, very murky. It becomes very messy, and I'm going around giving the pastors my CV, and this is my bio, and this is what I've done, and so on. And it becomes about me. And here's my attitude: I go to the session, and it's in God's hands, and I'm leaving it up to the Lord. I'm not calling anybody. I'm not asking anybody for their votes or anything like that, and I just leave it in the hands of the Lord. So whatever or wherever I end up, I believe that that's God's desire for my life, and I'm not going to fight to be in that position or anything like that. For me, this then takes away the taint of self. It takes away the desire or the politicizing of trying to get into office, because I think that it then becomes very murky.
I think, and I'm going to bring in Abigail, because I see your hand there before we move on to David. I think a generation is coming up who are now the generation that's always discussed as the future of the church, the future of the church. I am in that bracket who's always been, been of the age where you're a youth and you're always described as the future of the church. I'm 35 now, and I don't know how long I'm going to be the future of the church. I feel like I'm the current. I'm the church now.
You've got some years to go, Thomas.
Say that again.
You've still got some years to go. I remember when Dave and I were youth directors, there was a book that came out that said, sit down till you're 35,
So I feel like there's going to come a time when it's my 40th birthday and somebody's still saying I'm the future of the church. And so we're now a generation who's coming forward who, quite frankly, see this idea of God is in charge as a PR exercise. and it's simply like a thin veneer to sanitize the process. But in reality, what's still happening is politics, and the politics of, and it may not be you personally, Sam, because I know you to be a good man. You may not be the guy who's like, Paul, I voted for you last time. Remember, I got your motion through on this thing. Now you're on nominating committee, get my thing through. But we know this happens. And what is transparent is when people then come to the stage at session and say, we prayed and we toiled long and hard, and a name was suggested and we prayed again. And we know you're giving us a speech. We know this is not what happened. What happened was something else. And so I don't think making it more political necessarily taints it, because it seems to me that you're replacing one taint for another. However, surely there is a better way forward that's more pragmatic than this kind of mystical God is in charge idea.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Abigail. Can I just?
If we
go ahead,
Abigail, and then we'll move on to David. Sam, we'll come back to your comments in just a moment. Yeah. Abigail.
I was going to say, as someone who works in a political environment, like, I see the whole, I followed your motion, I seconded it last time, you got my back this time. I see that all the time. And I think now that I'm involved in church in a different capacity by sitting on the exec, and I sat on nominating committee, and that was an eye-opener completely. I now understand when people talk about church being political. And it may not be a specific individual saying, I had your back last time. It may be their wingman coming to you and saying, hey, so so-and-so does this outside of church. So-and-so does that. So-and-so's got a master's in this. So-and-so's background's in this. And actually, you know what? That person's name doesn't even feature because the people who want specific people in place haven't even considered that individual. And I think it's the way in which we operate. We've often operated in this kind of whose friend is friend rather than who's got the skills, expertise, and knowledge. If we think about maybe, for example, who we put as treasurer, not necessarily at conference, but at local church levels, it could be just the same person that's been there for the last 10 years. But actually, you've got a young person who maybe has a master's in accounting and now works at a large accounting firm. But those individuals are passed over, maybe because they don't fit the bill, I don't know, or maybe because they just haven't had the exposure, or they're not friends with the right people, or they don't come from the right side of town, or they haven't been in church long enough. Like, there are so many things that we often neglect in our decision making that I think affects who we put in what places. But we have to, I think, like Uncle Des says, CVs should be available for those who are on the nominating committee, and maybe not a CV that's written by the individual, but actually, if we keep up-to-date HR logs of what our pastors have done before, what they've done, what their area of expertise is, what training they're currently doing, that may help the nominating committee have a more objective approach, possibly. Just an opinion.
And David, just before I bring you in, there's a couple of points in the comments here. You've mentioned one, Abigail. There's a saying the CV should be available to the non-com, not to the general public. And the other point is a very poignant point that I want to return to by Lee White-Samuels here. The point is not necessarily to get a black person because we need a black face in the room. Is to have a situation where the person who's given the job is sensitive to and understands the needs of the demographic they're gonna serve. And we touched on this in a previous conversation. Do the black church trust that, for example, if Adrian became ministerial director, that he would serve the needs of the black ministers with conviction and pursue their needs with all of the vigor that a black minister would? Do the white church trust that if a black person becomes president, that he will address their needs just as expeditiously as a white minister would? It's the question of trust. And does the person who gets the job, can they be sensitive to the needs of the demographic? But David, if you can, you had a comment.
Well, first of all, I believe representation is important because we want to show that we are a diverse community. Whatever that representation may be, it's important. And of course, the church now has become far more diverse than simply Afro-Caribbean English. It's become Eastern Europe, Brazil. It's global. The global church is in the BUC. The second thing is, if we have politics in our committees, it shouldn't be, and it's time for us to grow up. To grow up and be mature people, spiritual people. We are not like the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. We are not political parties. This is the church. That is not an idealism. That is what God calls us to be. And in the election of leadership, there is no place for politics. If there is nothing more demoralizing. Now, you take a few sessions we've had over the last 3 or 4 years. Somebody comes to me every time and say, do you know what happened? It was terrible. It was this. It was that. He didn't get it. They slagged him off. They put someone up and he was crashed down, and it was unjust. It was unfair. And so you get this sort of demoralization that things aren't how they should be. I expect that in the Labour Party. I expect that in the Tory Party. I don't expect it in the church, and it shouldn't be. And the Bible says it shouldn't be.
And I accept what you're saying, that this that we are not the Labour Party, we are not the Conservatives, we are the church. However, I think from a technical competence perspective, in terms of what the process looks like, I do think there is something we can borrow from that field, just in terms of the robustness of systems, the transparency of systems, and the efficacy of systems. Because I think if we have a system time and time and time again that we all can see the flaws, we all can see the problems with it, and we don't move to change it on the basis that we are Christians and God is in charge, I think we are failing to have vision. And so my question, just as you respond to that, David, I had a question directly for you based on a comment you've made before. If we do pursue the best people for the directorships and beyond, and even for the churches, what is the perception in terms of who stands to lose if the system is more egalitarian, if the system is more transparent? Are there losers and winners in such a future, even if it's a perceived one?
I certainly don't see it in that framework anymore. You could have argued 20 years ago, yep, there were some clear losers, clear winners. In fact, I did a quick calculation before I came on. In the whole of the British Union, there are actually only 40 white workers, white pastors, whatever. And so there are always going to be a minority, a small group, and there's not one I know amongst those guys who are sort of trying to climb for power and be ambitious and say, I must get through that traditional hierarchy, I must become a departmental director or whatever. It just, I don't see it. And to be fair, maybe I'm out of it. Maybe I live out in the sticks. But I just don't see that there is a ground base of people who are saying, if things change, we're going to lose. I mean, the whole Anglo community recognizes a reality. They want growth. They want growth amongst all the church. Growth isn't happening. And so you just don't frame it like that. It just isn't part of the story. Who's going to lose? I don't know. We're all going to lose if we don't get the right people for the job.
So are we going to speak truth on here?
I'll speak truth, Paul.
Are we going to speak the truth?
Yeah.
We're going to speak our perspectives.
Because in reality, see, ministers are great at giving the speech. You almost persuaded. I think that's the term, almost persuaded. But let's be very clear. Why, if you say there are 40 ministers, explain to me then how we are still playing a black-white game when it comes to being in positions of leadership. That makes no sense. Explain to me why. Explain, that can't be representation then. Explain to me why Adrian could have been on that nominating committee, and when he hears the words, I think he said this, by the way, Adrian, when you hear the words, do we have enough black and whites in the room? Those kind of concepts, whether we like it or not, they are the truth. Uncle Sam, I hear what you're saying, but in real terms, we know that the reason why the white ministers don't have to think, oh, I need to get up to the ladder, I need to progress, is because It's offered so many times. It's offered to them. I really don't want to have to say what I really want to say, but let's speak the truth. There is a truth that exists, and there is a different truth from what we're talking about. And the fact of the matter is, the reason why we can say and we can appear to present ministers in a kind of very salient, kind of open and honest way, it's not a truth, because we all know, listen, I will speak out. I remember when I was at that conference session, and I've said it before, I heard when he was told, the most beautiful man, when he was told, you shut up and you get on that stage and accept the job. That was about white representation. And he was told that by 2 black ministers. The game is being played. And until us as older heads, until we start speaking the truth, we cannot fix the system. And the system is not one of representation solely. And neither is it about the best person for the job. It's about the best qualified people to do the roles. And what we've been noticing for years are the unqualified people who have no previous experience getting into the roles that they should not have had. And we bear the brunt of it.
Adrian, if I can bring you in, and I want to specifically address what Paul is saying. As you make your comments, Adrian, can you also speak to, and if anybody else has a comment on this, can we speak to the idea, have we noticed, have we seen, is it reality? Because there's obviously a group of people who believe it to be reality, that there are sometimes and often white ministers who are escalated up the system at a rate or at a speed that is not common amongst black ministers. And we're going to delve into what has the experience of the black ministers been. But what do you have any comments to that in addition to your general comments?
I just want to give context to what Paul said. So when I sat in on the recommendations committee, that was back in 1990. Mm-hmm. When I was involved in the process last year, the dynamic had changed. Sure. And when we sat on the nominating committee, there was no, this officer must be white or this officer must be black. There was just none of that. Names were thrown on the table of all ethnicities, and that it just wasn't. It has the Pearson package style. It must be 1 black person and 2 or whatever. It just wasn't there. Sorry, I've forgotten your question, Thomas.
I was saying, have you seen that white ministers are often escalated through the system at a faster rate than their black counterparts? Is that something which you have noticed or have witnessed?
I've had black colleagues say to me that their perception is that that is the case. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So have I seen it? I think there has appeared to be people on a career path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think we'll come back to that in a bit.
We'll come back to that, Sam.
Yes. Can I just say what Paul has said is true? It does exist. It does exist. It would be wrong to say it doesn't. And I think that it's the law of supply and demand. You know, if there are only, let's say, Dave has mentioned 40 white ministers in the union, and I dare say they're not Anglo. You get guys who are from Eastern Europe, from South Africa, and all these other places. So what happens is that in the desire to have representation, we are in the, the British Union is the public face of the church. So when the public looks on the church at the union, they need to see a church that is diverse, that is representative. So there is that desire to make sure that we represent the cosmopolitan makeup of a diverse church, and so and I said that for that reason, of course, there are times when there are compromises are made, and so if you've got a lesser, lesser number, then you will take invariably, somebody will be fast tracked because you want to try and fill that gap. Certainly it does happen.
As we move on to the next question that is for David and for Adrian, I want to address the issue that's not how society works, though. So in general society, there are many boardrooms that don't reflect the society around them, in that they are 100% white, or they're 99% white, or often 100% white. But at the very least, there is a pursuit of who are the best people. Even if I say I'm bringing in Paul because he's my mate, I have to at least make sure that Paul is an absolute G at the job that I have to make sure that Paul is the best person at the job that he does, so as to not at least reflect badly on my recommendation. And then the problem becomes, well, are we then saying that there are no black people or no brown people who are the best at the job? And then that becomes a separate conversation. But the idea that we could fast track a less competent person simply to look diverse seems to me counterintuitive, because the whole organization suffers by having a less competent person, although they look good. And so I guess the next question that I was going to ask is, time and time again, when I've had conversations with white members and ministers, in light of these conversations, there seems to be a lack of awareness that black ministers or black members are experiencing any kind of difficulty or have had any kind of egregious experiences. And yet when we speak here, both David, yourself, and Adrian, you both articulated the fact that you know that racism has happened. You know that there has been difficult experiences, not only for the members you've pastored, but for your black colleagues. Why is it then that there seems to be this whole, oh, I didn't even know this was happening. I had no idea that black ministers were experiencing this. I had no idea that black members were experiencing that. Why is there, to the degree that you can answer, why do you think there is that ignorance of a very visceral and real experience that people are going through? I remember, David, you were talking last time about a church member who's now an older lady, speaking about the difficulty that she had at a church that yourself and Adrian were pastoring, but you were unaware that she was having this experience. Why are white members so unaware of our experience, or the experience of black people?
Firstly, in that case, and in the case of people I grew up with, they just didn't share. They kept it private. And the truth is, a lot of Afro-Caribbean people have suffered in silence. And, that particular young person was told by her parents, don't make a fuss. Just carry on. Just work hard. Just keep going. And I think that's the pain that we're beginning to understand now. Also, the white church and the black church, in one sense, are ghettos. We're still not mixing well as we should. We're still not hearing other people's stories. We still don't have an open climate. This conversation is fairly new. None of us want to rock the boat. We think that there is peace in the valley when there isn't. Most people are peacekeepers, not peacemakers. And so if you're the pastor of the church, you just want peace around the board table. You don't particularly want conflict, because that's a lot of hard work. So I think it has been a closed story, which, and the Anglos, if we're honest, have seen fears and threats. We've seen
fears and threats.
I suppose you would say, don't open a Pandora's box. So if you go from the time that the Pearson package started, Anglos have accepted this, whites have accepted this. They try not to complain. They don't whinge. I think we lived happily under the Pearson package because there was representation, and that gave us a certain amount of security. We will always have a voice. Representation is about having a voice, and that is as important as competence. I'll rewind the video on that one. I'm not sure. It could be as important as competence, right? Because it's when you've had the what I call the Trinity, the three officers, there is or often been an Anglo there, to have a voice, to share in the story. This is shared leadership. Don McFarlane used to call it an arranged marriage. And that was the setup. And by the way, he did say that in arranged marriages, you can love each other, even if you're forced together. Okay? You know, and I buy into that. I believe it. You know, I'm passionate about that, and would argue. I'm still not ready to throw it away, because I think it being a pragmatist, it still works. But we have moved into a different stage, and so I have to rethink like everybody else.
Very quick comment from Paul, and then I want to ask Sam a question and get some of his comments. Paul.
So, on the basis of truth, yeah. So, if we say that, you know, we're trying to paint the picture that the white membership's kind of like accepted it and blah, blah, blah. You know, when I read the document for the proposal for the establishment or designation of specific indigenous evangelism churches within the British Union, a paper that was written by and endorsed by other white ministers, I find that it's disingenuous to believe that this conversation is new. It's not new. It's been this paper was written in 1994. Like, let's not pretend that this is a new story, a new narrative. I've got another one here. The rationalization of the winds of change. It's painful to read that one, because this is where we say that our black ministers are silent. It's not true. In here, you see the experiences of black ministers who are desiring change, who are looking for something else. So let us not pretend that this is a new conversation. Let's not pretend that it's a new conversation. The fact is, if we claim that it's a new conversation, the people that will always lose are the blacks. They will always lose.
I don't perceive it like that, and I'll tell you why. Because, so here's my story. I've seen the church change. I've seen it change from majority white leadership to black leadership. I'm comfortable with that. I'm happy to live with that. That is probably the way things should be. Not probably, that is the way things should be. Okay? I've bought into that. I believe in it. But I've gone through a change process, as we all have. And I'm saying, and you can understand the Anglo picture, hey guys, you are in leadership. You run the show, essentially. We are now a minority. We know our place. Let's get on with it and live together. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect, but, you know, the story, you see, so the grey hairs, right? I had someone on the phone to me the other day, right? The 60s, 70s, and 80s. Those people who are very heavily involved in the change of the Pearson package, right? They say to me, and I'm not being inflammatory, I'm simply saying what is often expressed, what more do they want? And I'm trying to help them understand that we've still got to move further. You see, the story goes, hang on, because you see, as change comes, as the change in culture comes, as the change in leadership comes, it has to be done on a pragmatic basis, not a revolutionary basis, because you lose people, you get a great sense of loss, and my leaders, my overseer is a black leader. I say, praise the Lord. I don't have a problem with that. And so we work on this together. We have honest conversations. We make sure that there is racial harmony and diversity, not just at the conference level, but also in the local church. And that's where, actually, if you're really honest, that's where the hard work has actually got to take place now. Not in the union or the conferences as such. It's actually making it work in the local church.
I hear you, Dave. If we can just get a comment from Abigail, and then I want to move the conversation on with a question to Sam. We can do this all day, Paul. I get it. I hear you. Abigail.
Two things. As always, perception is relative, and also I think for me, there's an issue in the fact that the language used was, what more do they want? Like, why that's what I'm gonna say, because otherwise we're gonna, as you said to Paul, be here all day. Why they? Like I'm human too.
Mm-hmm. So Sam, what has in addition to your comments, Sam, that you're going to make, what has been the experience of Black ministers in our context here, not only in our conference but all the way up to the division? You have a lot of knowledge and experience in this area. In a brief few words, what has their experience been?
Yeah, well, I think that the Pearson package was rolled out, and the Pearson package provided for representation at all levels of the church. But I think that what took place in reality is that there arose a glass ceiling at where Black ministers were not moving on to the division, and there was sheer tokenism that was taking place. So yes, there was representation, and I agree with Dave that the levers of power have changed. But I think that in response to the question of what more do they want, I think that we want equality at all levels. We want to see transparency. I want to know that I'm not treated any less than the other person. And that's what we try to do in leadership. And Thomas, I wanted to come back to something that you said, because you said that out in the world, they try to go for the best. So you might see a board that is all white, but we know that they've gone for the best. And I challenge that notion, because let's take the Football League, where the Premier Division, they have got all black, all white football managers. And I was reading recently where Sol Campbell has done his coaching badge, desperately wants to get into managership, but there are no openings. The phone doesn't ring for him. And remember, he was around at the same time as Frank Lampard. And so he's saying, look at Frank Lampard, he's the manager for Chelsea. And Lampard's response was, well, I've just worked harder, bruv. You know, which is a load of nonsense. You know, so let's not think that it's all good out there, that they've chosen the best man for the job, because they haven't.
Just a quick question. So I said that is absolutely the case, but I said then now you have the conversation of your Sol Campbells who are equally as good for the job. Why are they now not getting the job? But I think before you get to that conversation, you first have to have travailed the waters of, are we even trying to get the best people? Because if you're having people who are failing at the basics, the conversation of do we have representation seems a bit premature, because we don't even have people who can do the job, much less a balance of people.
Let me say that's a harsh commentary. Let me say this. Let's say I go into a boardroom and I'm the president. I've got Adrian Peck. I know the guy. I've worked with him and so on. I've got Dave Neal, you know, and the committee members. They've got their CV. These guys' CV in front of them, and they say, well, yeah, let's go for Dave Neal. And as the president, I'm saying, well, no, not Dave Neal, because I wouldn't go for that name. But yeah, on his CV, he's street and lanes above the other guy. But I know that Dave's got a short temper. You know, he doesn't deal well with people and so on. So I think that the whole notion of the CV doesn't have to be the best way of doing things, because there are things that leaders around the table know about certain individuals that they would say, well, look, I don't think this guy is suited to that role, but they cannot divulge. And I've seen committees where they've ignored the direction of the president or the person in the chair and chosen who they think is best, and it hasn't worked out very well.
I hear you. And Paul, now I've got a question for you in addition to your comments that you're going to make, Paul. You've been asking consistently throughout this entire conversation, in whose interest is it for change to occur? And in light of everything we've discussed, what's the answer?
I'm not answering that question yet.
Okay.
Sorry.
Paul makes up his own rules as he goes along. You need a HR appointment tomorrow, mate. Carry on, Paul.
So something just occurred to me. Part of the problem why we're in the position that we're in is because what we were taught and told was equality has never been equality. That's really important to understand, because that is what Black and brown people have been experiencing forever. Telling them it's equality, saying we've given some, what more do you want? We've been told that it's equality. It's never been equality. The mere fact that we can put lovely words behind all of these things, but then ultimately we're still describing the fact that there's disproportionality, unfair treatment of the Black ministers, where Black ministers are glass ceilinged and white ministers can go straight up even though they're in the minority. What we are being told is that there is equality, and it is not equality. Fundamentally, we keep lying. I don't mean as an individuals, as a society. We keep lying. We keep telling Black people and brown people that their lives matter. We keep saying that it's equality and that there's diversity and inclusion, but actually we are never quite seen. We're told our stories are not loud enough. We're told that we're speaking in the wrong spaces. It's all nonsense. I mean, without being disrespectful, I read the communicator on racism, Dave, and I really appreciated some of the articles. In fact, the large majority of them. But the one thing that stood out to me was, where's your Black story?
What do you mean?
Well, where's the Black story of my experience of racism? I'm not really directing this to you, but I'm saying in general. I just think that's what we keep missing. We keep ignoring the fact that there are Black ministers that have not been treated fairly. It's not spoken about. Sure, we get Rafat doing a lovely, beautifully choreographed, I'm being really out of order, beautifully choreographed apology. Nobody knows what the apology's for. And nobody talks about it. Nobody goes to somebody and says, you know what, we're sorry, we did you wrong. You were glass ceilinged, or this is what happened. It's not spoken about. And that we want to keep portraying that everything is okay, or at least progressing. It's not a truth. And the moment time we can accept that it's not a truth, then we can be brave like John Beldam. Then we can be brave like John Beldam, because his apology is different. Because he's had Black employees, he's had Black people they've had that, and they were still mistreating people. The apology can be different, but I think every time we pretend like things are moving forward or progressing, we keep ignoring the fact that there have been in its wake numerous ministers that have been hurt, numerous people, by the lack of representation and the willful ignorance of it. It's willful. It's not, oh, I didn't know. It's not a truth. There's documentation here. It's not true.
So Sam, I want to just come back again because I'm going to. No, Paul. I always appreciate your comments. Sam, you didn't get a chance to come in on the question. What has the experience of Black ministers been? Paul has mentioned John Beldam. I believe that's the New Bold president, and the experiences that he apologized for and acknowledged. Some were absolutely atrocious, like faculty to student, faculty to faculty. My dad studied at New Bold in the early 90s, and there were faculties who would say to them, if they were a day late with their international school fees, they would say, we're calling up the immigration office to tell them that you haven't paid so you can get sent back. They would say that in class. There was faculty who would say to my dad and his cohort, A's are not for Africans. What's an African going to do with an A? only Europeans and Americans get A's. And this was the experience that they were going through. But why I resonate with what Paul is saying is that he acknowledged their experience and apologized for it, instead of giving a PR exercise of a general apology that nobody knows what it's actually for. But this is why I want to shed light, if you can, Paul. What has the experience of the Black ministers been? Because I know you have this knowledge. If you can just tell us what you can, so we can have some kind of idea of the shape of the problem.
And yet, part of me has to ask,
Paul, sorry, Sam.
Yeah,
I'm muting your mic now, Paul. You're suspended.
Before I answer that, because I'm also very conscious, as we say, Black ministers have been hurt. I think we could also say white ministers have been hurt. And although and so the levers of power, whenever you change the levers of power, and the levers have been with the Black leaders now for 30 years or so, and I'm sure that there will be whites who could say, well, we've also felt hurt. So let's not forget that. But I think that, what I've seen over the years as a minister in the church, going through to the general conference session, I've seen where there's been a whiteout at the TD stand, where you go there and there are no images of any Blacks at all. So as I've said before, when you open the family album, I'm looking for my photograph somewhere there, and where it's been sanitized and we're not represented, I don't feel as though I belong in the TED, and so, we want to be made to feel as though we belong in the TED, being the largest union. And for 2 sessions, I saw that that took place. We did not feel as though we belong, and having vocalized that, we've had to say we are here in order for the guys at the division to take notice. But the tokenism that's gone on at the TED is very clear. At Newbold, the tokenism of one lecturer in the theology department, again from the same entity, that's been very evident. There are many Black pastors who can tell you we've tried to get in to be lecturers at Newbold, and the door has been closed. So that is again predicated on the tokenism that exists, and so we want to get beyond that, because that makes us feel less than. The Newbold College is within the British Union, the majority Black members and pastors, and I think that it's, we want to see representation. I don't, and then on the other side, the whites may feel, well, this is a takeover. They want to take over. They want everything, and so on. And I just think that we want to see a system where there is free movement. I don't want it based on patronage, or this is my mate, therefore I'm going to give him an opportunity. And so what you want to see is fairness for all, transparency for all, and I think that's really what we're aiming for.
Abigail.
For me, I've noticed a word come up in the comments a couple of times and in our conversation, and that word is accountability. And I think in our church culture, accountability is not something that is very evident. Personally, working in an organization where scrutiny is like the thing we do, like my organization, we scrutinize the mayor. That's all the assembly members are there to do, basically. But I don't see the same thing within our church. And scrutiny is not always a bad thing. Scrutiny can be a very important developmental tool. But in scrutiny, I think there's some element of equity. And I say that because equity is about fairness. And to scrutinize someone, you have to be fair, you have to be impartial. So how do our systems operate in an equitable way to ensure that our church culture is improved? That's my question. I'm going to throw it out there to you guys. Paul, you had your hand up, so I'm going to take you off detention and let you speak.
You know,
and then I'll go to David.
It's really interesting because I'm not entirely an advocate of representation, strangely, because I am all in favor of the best person. And while I don't agree with individual ministers giving out their CVs, I think that there is benefit in us choosing the person that's got the skills and the experience. However, I also find myself knowing that it is not in the interest of the ministers for that to happen. It's simply not. It doesn't make any sense to me how we can expect Uncle Sam, with all due respect, right? Because you've known me and you can kick my butt, but with all due respect, somebody that's got a degree and a master's in Bible to run a multi-million-pound charity, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that a person, the president, should be able to sit on the edge, as the chair or whatever it is of the education establishments. It makes no sense, because that's not your experience. Your experience in church, your experience in running a board, and I get that. But actually, if we are looking at the best people for the job, then it has to be people that have that kind of experience. And they don't.
I absolutely agree with that. I do agree with that, with the notion in terms, when I became president and I was then thrust into the chairmanship of the John Loughborough School Board, that was a baptism of fire,
Yes.
and I was out of my depth, and I'm not gonna lie, and I remember saying to Don, I'll take on the presidency if I don't have to do John Loughborough, so I was out of my depth. I discovered that there's a whole new language you've got to learn. There's a whole new lot of stuff that so it was difficult, and I felt that it would have been better for somebody, and we have individuals in the churches who are qualified in the area of education, who could have done a far better job because they know the language and all that. So there's absolutely no doubt about that. I think that in the church system, in every career path, you want to know that you are able to advance. You want to, and dare I say, climb up the greasy pole. So the minister would like to be able to get to the conference at some point. It's seen as a promotion in terms of his career or her career, and when that call comes, it is an affirmation of that individual's skills, the recognition that their skills in a certain area have been recognized, and there are guys who do well when they are called to that position. And I think what I've seen, Paul. Let me just respond directly. Where I've seen situations where you've taken a man out of the church and you have put that person to become president. They are really not qualified. Because the leap has been too great. It's like taking a teacher from a classroom and putting them into becoming head of the school, and they've missed so many tiers. And when I became president, and Dave and I were in the youth office together, it was because I had been a youth director. I'd seen Don McFarlane at work in terms of the management of committees at that level, the various things that he did. So when I was asked to be president, that training, that induction that I had with Don was excellent preparation for what I was called to do. And was there somebody else who could do a better job, Paul? I'm sure. If you're the fastest gun in the West, there's always going to be somebody who can shoot you up, right? So I'm not going to pretend and say, well, yeah, there was nobody else who could do a better job, but just God had chosen me for that. But the preparation that I had enabled me to do what I was called to do when I got there. Dave?
Okay. So here's the disconnect. That promotion really should be the reverse of the way it is. That the highest position in the church is the local church. And that a pastor should not be on 100% salary factor. He should actually be on 110 or 120% based on years of service and lengths of service in that particular church. Our system is back to front. The GC up's there, the local church is there. It's actually reverse. And so that's a paradigm shift. However, I don't want to go into denial about the story of recognition. If you've, as it currently stands, if you've served a good length of time in the local church and have many local churches and have experience, there is a stroke to any pastor when he is called to serve the wider work. We're in denial if we say that isn't the case. It is true. So because you're given more responsibility, usually with more responsibility, you get a small increase in salary. Of course, the other story working in the conference system or in departmental work is you get support staff to help you. You have a desk, you have a computer, you have certain privileges that the local pastor doesn't get. He's on his own. But I do want to say something about accountability. Accountability must be at every level. It's easy to say we want the president to be accountable, but you and I know pastors in the local churches that are anything but accountable to the members they serve. Some pastors are dictators. They serve as though they are little oligarchs. And that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. And I don't care whether it's black or white, it's wrong. And it's got to stop. And it is creating churches that have become dysfunctional, and it is not godly. The other issue about a leader, Sam is absolutely right, and you're right, Paul. We are not competent and trained to be CEOs of multi-million-pound organizations. And Sam was right to try and delegate educational responsibilities to the professionals, for example. And a president in particular in the North or South and the union is called to sit on about endless boards, and they are bored out of their mind. It's board after board after board. I don't want my president to be a CEO. I want him to be a spiritual leader. And I'm not going to apologize for this, Paul, or anybody. The role of a president primarily is to be a spiritual leader of the church in that territory and to help move the church forward and help the church grow in that territory. If you go into denial about that, you refuse to understand what the nature of the church is about, even in the real world, even in London, even in Birmingham, even in the North. You cannot deny that the primary role of a president is to be a shepherd, a spiritual leader. And this is what's happened in the 21st century since we've become charities. He's more of a trustee, CEO, board chair. No. He is a spiritual leader called to lead the church together. And yes, there must be no glass ceilings for anybody. He treats people with justice, equality, and fairness, and makes sure there are policies and procedures in line with that. And if not, that's why we're where we are.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
and then I'll jump in.
So yeah.
Was that an amen?
No.
We'll formulate a sentence, please. Please.
Because actually, if there was to be an amen, then if that person is being led by God, we should not be seeing the level of racism that we've been.
Yes, agreed.
And therefore, the spiritual leader part, while I get it, it's an impassioned plea and almost persuaded again, I find myself looking at the people that have been glass ceilinged and the systems that have done that and the systems that have supported the white superiority and the privilege. And while it's lovely to hear, in practice, doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. We can applaud it and I get it. And listen, we grew up like that. We'd hear ministers give these moments and everybody would be shouting, yes, amen, we have this hope. The bottom line is, what we didn't realize was that behind the scenes, there were things going on that were not anything to do with God.
And I've said that the church has no place for that.
We understand that it doesn't have any place. What we're trying to say is it has been happening.
Yes,
and it probably still does, because none of the conference officers could ever present us with a proposal that shows that there is a change from the Pearson package. Where is it articulated that there is an intentional move from the Pearson package to something else? And that's in part because they're not CEOs. In part because they don't necessarily have the skills to create organizational change. I'm being slightly facetious, but probably slightly true. I still think that's where the experience comes from. And I'm not trying to take away and say that they're not the spiritual leader. I get that. But I'm also saying that in order for things like good HR processes to be in place, which holds ministers to account, which works with the local church to understand local strategy so that the minister doesn't come in and become, the dictator, there needs to be things in place. And those things can only come if you know that they exist. And frankly, most of the people that are in those positions don't get it enough. So we end up hurting people. We should never have let Valerie Clark Eccles' case happen, and still it's happening up until today. That's not okay. I get at least one phone call a year from a conference worker asking me who my lawyer was. What is that? How is that even okay? That we are still living in situations where we're mistreating people. Don't get it. Just don't get it.
One thing that I want to pick up on.
Put me on mute. I'm done.
Paul, you're not done. One thing that I want to pick up is something that David said. And you said that positions, and this is going to be me digressing, I'm not even going to apologize, but we talk about positions increasing pay, which means that women are never going to get the increase in pay that some of our men see. Just saying, because of the way the system's set up. Just saying. I'm one of those people who was somewhat turned off from being a female minister because of the inequality that women face in our church.
Yeah.
Putting it out there. Just saying it straight. But one thing I will say is that, and I think Uncle Des put it in the comments, do we need to select a CEO? Do we need to appoint a CEO separately, or do we need to bring one in? Because unfortunately, because of the way our church is now set up as a charity, we have the president has a specific responsibility outside of just being our shepherd and being our mirror of who God has called him to be and who he is called to lead us as. He has a responsibility to us in a legal sense, a financial sense, a governance sense. And like we've been saying, oftentimes our leaders are not equipped at a local level. And then when they're jumped up to a position of leadership such as that, they don't have the skills to transfer up and just increase their reach. Does that make sense? So what does success really look like for us, or as pastors? For you, what does success look like? And what does leadership look like in this sphere that you're dealing with so many different competing and combative elements in our society and in our church?
Adrian, I think you had your hand up from earlier.
Just to backtrack slightly, it's recognised, I think, that we do need more leadership training, which is, I think, why the MA in leadership was done at Newbold, to get a leadership track. And there's always the tension between the fact that the church is a spiritual enterprise, but all this other stuff, the other baggage that comes, turns it into something else at times. And I think much of the stuff being said is there's a distrust of the system, and there's perceptions, and that may not be reality, and you probably never get to reality, and there's intentions. But I hear what Sam said earlier. I don't want to turn this into a political exercise where people campaign for offices, but I think if it's transparent and it's clear, the criteria, and you still have personality requirements. So if the man or the woman gets angry, then that's a personality issue. It's not about that. I think it's about taking away all the distrust of the system, so that half of our conversation would be moot.
Sam, you want to come in?
Yes, please. Just let me just say, I was privileged to be in the church for 30 years, and I hear people talking about changing the system. Why don't we change the system? If the system is broken, we acknowledge that the system that we work with is not the best. However, the church is not autonomous. So the South England Conference is governed by the BUC. The BUC is governed by the TED, and they're all it's all policy-driven, policy-led. So the BUC does not have the right to step outside of policy and do its own thing, nor does the SEC, because you're all in the same policy. So around the world, the churches are following a similar system. I'm wholeheartedly in favor of accountability, Abigail. And as the president, that was one of the things that I don't like incompetence. And it pains me when I hear people say, well, you've sent us this minister and he's rubbish, and he can't cheer a board, he can't do this, he can't do that. I don't like that. And I want to know that our ministers are top drawer, because in their congregations, they've got nurses, they've got doctors, they've got school teachers, they've got all kind of people with qualifications, they've got CEOs of companies and so on. And you come to a church board and you haven't even got an agenda prepared, or you don't know how to chair a meeting and so on. And you've got a CEO who's sitting there thinking, where are you from? And so let me just share you. This is I'm giving you a real example of what happened. We rolled out a evaluation for which we did for our ministers every year. Number one, some churches did not like it. Why should we evaluate our pastor? That's not our role. That's not our function. We're not going to evaluate our pastor. Some pastors did not want to be evaluated because the church board's got it in for me. They don't like me, and so they're going to give me a bad report and blah, 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 blah. And the argument of members were, and especially teachers, I've got to be evaluated, so why should the minister not be evaluated? In my workplace, I'm constantly being evaluated, so why should the minister not be evaluated? And we've not created that ethos. And there were even ministers who said, well, you, the members, cannot evaluate me because my employer is God. So you've got all of those kind of dynamics that's going on. But I believe that we really need to have a robust evaluation system that holds ministers accountable, because it pains me whenever I hear that a minister is failing or not doing the job that he has been called to do. But it seems to me that it's got to be taken outside of the church, and you bring in an HR company that's going to, do it in a robust manner, and that means we have to pay for it. But it really does need to be done in order to get the level of accountability that is really required, and that is something that conferences can do. Let me just say this finally. I've not in my 30 years as an employee within the church system. Very rarely does one become a conference president and incompetent at the same time. It really doesn't happen, and that's putting it in the hands of members. Our church members are very savvy. They are competent individuals who look at their pastors and they know who is able to deliver and who can deliver. Sometimes it goes awry because of interference with the system, but in the main, I've not seen where our members will put into a position of leadership somebody who is not able to do the job.
Tom, can I bring you in?
Yeah, I just wanted to address something that David said about the spirituality of our organization, or the spiritual nature of our organization, and therefore our leaders, versus the secular organizations. And, you know, I've been in church work since I was 15 or 16, in various youth leadership, been on boards, been on federations, been on advisories. And in all of my time here, one thing I can tell you is this: if you want your motion to go through, you have to learn the language of being able to spiritualize it. You cannot simply show up at a meeting and say, "I had an idea yesterday. We should paint the walls red." There has to be some kind of run up of, you know, brethren, I have prayed and I have toiled hard about this and I have fought. You have to do all of, and the reason I bring this up is to simply say we are spiritual, causes us to overlook so many different facets of what an organization like this is about. I have seen ministers who are horrible people who will tear down their elder in a hot second if it's politically expedient for them, who will lie about their church members and people above, who will then come out behind the rostrum and say the most beautiful words. And so because if I'm in the leadership at that church, I can see both sides, but from the membership perspective, this is a spiritual man. And so this idea of spirituality is one that we have to navigate carefully, because to simply say we are a spiritual organization and therefore let's not do what the secular organizations do is to miss the point that something like organizational leadership or organizational psychology or something to do with culture change is not something you pray about on Wednesday and start doing it on Thursday. That's not how the process of that works. You have to have the qualification and experience to be able to do it. And the idea that we could have a managing director who deals with the business of the church and then a ministerial director who is the highest expression of the spiritual leadership, I think has legs, because what it says is there is a very real spiritual element that has to be taken care of. And we have all seen ministerial directors who were fantastic at that role, didn't necessarily mean that they would be able to translate that leadership into a more technical capacity. But we've also seen leaders who are fantastic at the technical, but don't let them run your prayer meeting. And so I think there is a way of being able to do two, because the church is a business as well as it is a spiritual organization.
David,
and I shouldn't use spirituality to just kind of gloss over.
No. And I'm a little distressed that you think that I'm trying to do that.
No. Let me clarify. I don't think you're trying to do that, but I'm saying I don't think we should. That narrative has been employed to do that in the past, and so I don't want people to listen and think, "Oh, here we go again." We're just saying spiritual in order to cover up the fact that. Do you know what I mean?
So spiritual leadership includes competence. Spiritual leadership includes accountability. Spiritual leadership includes authenticity. Spiritual leadership involves the ability to sit on a school board, if I can put it like this, and say, "Dear God, do we keep this school open or do we close it? Dear God, do we sack this teacher or do we keep that teacher?" For example, spiritual leadership has to deal with pastors who fall from grace, who can be incompetent. Spiritual leadership, actually, the hardest part of being a president is to what you do when you've actually got a poor pastor who's performing, and how to help him grow and give him more opportunities and give him grace when the members may be actually saying, "Fire, fire, fire."
So David, with all due respect, at American Express, they also have methods of dealing with people who are not performing and not firing them straight away. They have performance reviews. They have grace periods. If you're underperforming in McDonald's senior leadership, you don't get fired tomorrow. There's grace.
My friend Thomas, you're misunderstanding something, and it would be so easy. Talk with Sam, talk with Ian, talk with McFarlane, Pastor McFarlane and Perry and these guys. You just try bringing every HR principle in when you're dealing in the church with, well, it doesn't matter whether it's white folk or black folk, when you just apply clinically HR principles, you get the massive onslaught of rear guard. How could you treat us like this? You're not being fair. The mindset of our members, our older members to be fair perhaps, does not work in such a clinical, clear-cut organizational approach. And there is an expectation that the church leaders is a church leader is a very different person at conference level to a CEO of McDonald's or Burger King or whatever king it is, right? Or your mid-sized company. Now, one of the realities I face right now is I've just moved into a company, the Stanborough Press, which is different to a charity, which is the South England Conference. And I'm having to learn how to live in a business world where we have to compete, where we have to do those sort of things, right? And where we have to make money.
But this is the problem, David. The problem is that you've been appointed into a company and you are now learning how to do that job.
Yes.
That's massively problematic.
Well, the role of a pastor and someone who's been trained spiritually is actually to be involved in many different functions. You do administer at the local church by being chairing the church board. It is a fact of life that a pastor has many different strings to his bow by the nature of being a pastor. You're a shepherd, you're an administrator, you're an organizer, you're a preacher, you're a teacher. It is a multidisciplined role.
But my final point, and sorry, Abigail, because I don't want to take up the comment that's strong from the whole thing of as a spiritual leader, you should be able to sit on the education board and say, "Dear God, should we close the school or leave it open?" is at the cornerstone of why this system is so problematic. Because leading a school board is not a spiritual exercise; it's an exercise of technical competence.
No,
and so a person
Hold on.
It's not easy. You're missing it again, you see.
No, I get your point. I understand the spirituality.
The difference between a school board in Haringey, right, in secular Haringey, is very different to running a school board that you call Seventh-Day Adventist Stanborough Park School. Sure, we have to know the principles of governance, right? But you have an education system and an education philosophy and a mission that is different from a school in Haringey. This is reality. And while you have to have correct governance, there are different philosophies of education, different value systems. And so you need a spiritual governor, a spiritual leader to be involved. I'm not saying control, I'm not saying a minister, but you have to have that input or you don't have a Christian school.
Abigail.
I thought I saw Adrian's hand go up a little while ago, but I'm not sure. Adrian, did you have anything to add?
No.
Okay, that's fine. Paul, I'm going to come to you. Unmute, please. Thank you.
I guess this explains why we are in the position that we are in.
Go on.
And I think that just makes it really clear, because if we can't hear that dealing with something like institutional racism, dealing with white privilege, etc., is a social issue that requires a different type of skill set and solution, then we are just going to sit here and pray. We're just going to rely upon spiritual leadership, when in part we've had spiritual leadership throughout the entire duration of this migrant journey. And I just think perhaps it's time to go and talk to people in the real world, where you are not coming to pray for me, but you're going to come and you're going to hear my experiences, and you're going to understand that your solution, while valid, is not the only solution. And you see, for us as Black and brown people, we have a legacy and a history of praying. We have a legacy and a history of trusting in God. But at some point, we have to sit on the bus. Now, that is an action position. When back in the, I can't remember when it was, the 70s or whenever, when the Black churches decided to withhold their tithe, that's an action. So again, yeah, beautiful narrative. But the unfortunate part is that there are times when it goes beyond just the prayer. It goes beyond the spiritual leader. I don't care how great a spiritual leader Uncle Sam is, and he is a great spiritual leader, but not even he could save John Loughborough. Let's speak the truth. Uncle Sam, you could have had the direct line to Christ. Not even you could have saved John Loughborough at that time. Like, let's be honest. Let's not simplify these things, because by simplifying it, you diminish some of the experiences of people that have had these difficult experiences. And come on, people, let's get rid of the real world.
And I just want to clarify something, because I don't want David to misunderstand me or any audience member to misunderstand. We are a spiritual organization, and therefore all of our leaders need to have the values that are in line with what it is our spirituality informs us to have. But the school that is succeeding in Hampstead, or that is succeeding in Haringey, as you mentioned, the leadership that has caused its success has to be present in our leadership. And then in addition to that, the spiritual values. But then when you say, oh, okay, we don't have the technical leadership skills, but it's okay because they're a really spiritual person.
No.
That's problematic.
I'm not saying that.
Okay, cool.
David? No, go ahead.
I don't want to be misunderstood.
Yeah.
Spiritual leadership combined with competence, however you describe that. Absolutely. A spiritual leader who doesn't have competence in the multidisciplines isn't going to move the church forward.
No, and again, with humility, I'm responding to what Sam said. And Sam, please, I want to hear your comments as well. It's the fact that and I'm really grateful that you were this candid with us. When you were told to sit on that board of Stanborough, you knew that you were out of your depth, as spiritual as you are. And I have seen you to be a spiritual man. I have benefited from your spiritual leadership. You understand, and you have said that what was needed was a certain level of technical understanding. And the fact that we have a system that could put Sam on that board unfairly to him and to everybody else who's involved, that could put him as a chair to that board and not think, let's bring a member who's more technically qualified, or another minister is more technically qualified, is the problem that we are trying to define within the system.
Sure. And I think that is something that we can fix at the local level. I mean, I noticed before I left employment, I noticed that Ian Sweeney, he, as the BUC chair, he's also the chair of the Stanborough Park School Board. But he then brought in somebody who was doing good work, and he became the chair of the school board. That took the pressure of Pastor Sweeney, and while he would still come to the board, but somebody else was doing that chairmanship role. And as Dave said, we as presidents, we are appointed to so many boards that it's, you know, it's on my way. It's just before I get to that board meeting that I'm reading the minutes or whatever. You know, you've just got so many things on your plate. You know, so but let me come to the spiritual entity, because this is something that you had raised before. The whole structure of the church. When I was the president, we tried to give more authority to the area coordinator. So when you've got 110 ministers, it is impossible to line manage 110 guys when they're out there and you are based in an office. You just cannot do it. So we said the line management would be the area coordinator, who would then he would be closer to the guys. He can oversee different aspects of the work. So, but here's the thing: if Dave Neal is in my area and Dave doesn't come to a workers' meeting, I say, well, Dave, you know, you did not come to the area fraternal. Why didn't you come? Who are you? You know, you can't talk to me. You know, you're not the president. so the whole setup in the minds of the ministers, the only person that they're recognizing as their line manager is the president. You know, so the area coordinator can say, well, you know, you need to give me an account and so on. But he said, you're not my line manager. You know, you can't tell me. And so we have a situation where, in the minds of the ministers, the only person that I'm accountable to is the president, and it creates a difficulty.
Adrian, go for it.
I must, following on from what Sam said, I spent 22 years in industry and management positions, and when I came into pastoral ministry, it was a culture shock. It was a cult, not in terms of becoming a pastor. What I mean is in terms of the professional disciplines or lack thereof, the culture of, you know, to even just changing over to an SEC email took months. And you just get told this is your work email, you use it, where I was coming from. I was going to ask Sam a question, actually. How much, I know we're trying to push the envelope here, but how much are we forced to do what we do by the policy book, which I understand is several inches thick? You've mentioned that. Because are we just talking, is this just hot air? I think there's a lot we can do in terms of what Paul is talking about, but in terms of this structural change, is this just a waste of our breath?
Use an analogy.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, to use an analogy, the church is an ocean-going liner, and you just cannot do a three-point turn. You know, it's not that easy. And so it really takes a lot. You've got a constitutional committee. You've got to go through to the committee, and that is at the BUC. If change is enacted at the SEC, then it has to be compatible with what they're doing in the NEC. You know, and so all the churches that, you know, we need to act in concert together. And so change is really not that easy. It change, and I've seen recently where sometimes, Dave alluded to it, where you can have that that top-down effect. So the TED will tell the BUC, this is what we want. BUC can vote it, and they can hand it down to SEC, and the constituents can turn around and say, no, we don't want it. We're not going to do it. So the SEC in that respect is autonomous. They can vote at session to say, well, we don't want this. We're not going to do it. But change does not come easily at all. So the kind of structure that I was talking about, where we're trying to give more authority to the line managers, to the area coordinators, and so on, is something that we did do as the SEC. We did give the power to the area coordinators, but in the minds of the ministers, you know, you can only lead if you're given permission by those that you are leading. And where the ministers were not willing to allow the line managers, I'm sorry, when I say line managers, allow the era coordinators to really function in that role. And I guess which area coordinator is going to say, well, I'm going to dob you into the president. You don't do this. I'm dobbing you in. So you find that relationships can be strained and all that sort of thing because I'm not going to dob you in. I'm not going to tell on you and all that sort of thing. So it becomes very, very difficult. And I think that there has to be a cultural shift, operational shift. But I'm saying, I think that the whole culture, you need to bring in an HR management firm that's going to bring about change because we're just too comfortable. It's too cushy. And ministers need to be held accountable. And I put my hand up and say, I'm quite happy. I was quite happy to be evaluated. And most of the ministers, to be honest, most of the ministers would say to me, I'm quite happy to be evaluated. But there were those who did not want the spotlight shone on them, and they would know the reason why.
Paul, I'm going to go to you, and then we're going to start to head towards a wrap up.
Yes, I hear you about an HR organization. But I think there's a wider piece of work. The wider piece of work is that the membership have to be brought along with the change. So there needs to be a comm specialist, somebody that is able to explain the change and how that makes sense. Somebody that can speak to the churches and say, listen, these are the type of people that you need to get to come to conference sessions because we're moving to a model of accountability. By the time it gets to conference session, we're almost too late because actually I need to know that David Neal is qualified for the job that he's going for and that we'd like him to go for. And if he's not, his name should not be put in the hat. Like, we need to get to that point when we start looking at the skills and the experience of people, and we start asking ministers to start thinking in those terms. So it's bigger than just an HR consultant. It's almost like a management team that helps the organization look at the different key stakeholders and work out how to map a project plan in order to make it work. That's the first thing. The second thing is, while we're talking about organizational change, structural change, ministerial challenges, and so on, which I don't believe that they're entirely the problem, to be fair. Let's not forget that 90% of this conversation is about those conversations that happen secretly. That's what this is about. Those conversations that happen secretly, those conversations which are not structural, where people are being moved into positions to go up along the ladder by virtue of their skin color, not because of their experience or skills. That's what this conversation is about. That cannot be legislated for. Because the point is that when we look at the TED, where the SEC gives, such a massive amount of money to, and they're not representative of us either. So I think at some level, let us keep also focused. Yes, we're trying to talk about changing the system and the culture, which requires more than just HR. It's a systematic cultural change that needs to occur. But let's also understand that this conversation is about the unfairness where one gets priority and precedence over another.
Abby, if I can just make there's some points I've seen in the comments here about a comment David made. I just want to clarify because I think they've misunderstood. I think when David was saying what more do they want, you were quoting an older white member who's been speaking to you. That wasn't a question that David was asking himself. Sorry, say that again.
Yes, sir. That is not a value or a statement I would make. That is a statement I was making of someone else who was on the phone to me.
Yeah.
and I'm trying to explain.
Perfect. Yeah, got it.
what the
So I
story
just
is.
wanted to make that clarification before we proceeded. Abigail.
What I would say is that this conversation is truly, it's the epitome of putting the pieces together. I think we've only touched on some of the pieces, most definitely only just touched on some of the pieces, but some of the things that I want to just kind of highlight that have stood out to me is this kind of hidden succession planning that I think operates in some respect. And this diminished experience and the way in which we sense a story and the storytelling that doesn't happen and only happens maybe in the comfort of our home and isn't explored on larger scale like this platform. Another thing is the systems that operate and the culture that has become embedded, and how do we go about dismantling and shifting such a culture in order to get to a position where equity, equality, and meritocracy exist and operate. And I think also we have to, as another piece that we have to also consider is race, gender, age. Because as much as this conversation started about race, we've kind of, there are pieces that haven't been able to kind of be explored in terms of intersectionality. And I think these are very key themes and key topics that have to be considered in the grand scheme of looking at the system and recognizing the way in which the system is built. Pastor Sam spoke about the various layers that exist in our organization, that we have to adhere to their policies and various policies in order to be compliant, I'm using that word carefully, with the policy of the organization. And I think these are some of the major pieces that oftentimes we don't explore, but have to be explored if we're really going to consider the system as a whole and what it really means to look at the system through 21st century lenses, through spiritual lenses, through lenses of discernment, but also employing expertise and skill and experience and knowledge that helps us to move forward in a way that's best for our church and best for the work that God has set out for us to do. Pastor Sam.
Yeah, I think, when we talk about meritocracy, and if I go back to where we began, I did say that I think we have to make some compromises, because when I go to the local Tesco and I look at the board of directors and leaders and so on, I'm not seeing many black faces on that either. And I'm not, and they would say, well, hey, this is meritocracy. We've chosen the best people for the job. I'm not seeing that at Sainsbury's and so on. So when you come to the church, number one, the church is a spiritual entity, and I think Dave has made that point very well. So I can't bring in a CEO, Paul, to run the organization. When I come to talk to him about the stressors of ministry, he's sitting there saying, "Pull your socks up, son, and get on with it," because he doesn't know what ministry is about. It's a spiritual. We're a spiritual entity, so I can't bring in a CEO to run an organization that he's not a spiritual guy. So he has to be able to empathize with ministers. He has to know what ministry is about, and so on. And here's the other thing, we've had this conversation before where we've said, yeah, you've got this guy who is the president of this organization, and now he's trying to tell me how I should minister, but he's never been a pastor, has he? So you get that situation that unless he's walked where I've walked, unless he knows what I've been through, then he can't say anything to me. And so you've got that dynamic. And I personally, I want to put it out there on the table that I would be disappointed if we move towards a system of meritocracy where when I look at the BUC lineup of directors, all I'm seeing is black faces, or all I'm seeing is white faces, or I'm just seeing all of one ethnic group because this is the best. These are the best guys for the job. We would have taken a step backwards. We would ferment dissatisfaction and people feeling more disenfranchised and not belonging, and so we want to retain a system whereby when I look at the lineup, I can say, yeah, I feel as though they've remembered me, and recognize that the church is a multi-ethnic, cosmopolitan organization, and if we move away from that, then we will do a detriment.
Paul, I'm going to head to you, and then I'm going to go to Tom to wrap up and give us some practical tips to use in our local churches.
I think that I'm not saying that there should be a CEO coming. That's not what I'm saying. However, a CEO might have the skills and the experience to navigate and help with some of these challenges that we're faced, right? That's my point. That's the first thing. The second thing is, Uncle Sam, that's part of the reason why we are where we are, because we've been taught that this is a multicultural church, which it kind of is, but it is also a black majority church, which is the one narrative we have always hidden from. We've run from it. But the fact is, it is a black majority church. That's not to say that that's in isolation and that's the only. No. And that's not saying that that's what leadership becomes. No. But in part, if I can't acknowledge the truth, when we look at the church, I think maybe we should give it a try. Maybe we should try saying, actually, we are a black majority church. I wonder what some of the white membership would do. Where would we go with some of the others that come in? But we are okay for us to not be seen in that regard. Doesn't make sense to me. And I just think that's, I'm not even putting that out as a solution, to be fair. I'm just saying, actually, it might encourage to think about it in a different way. And maybe there's a different kind of solution.
I'm going to quickly, before you go in, Tom, before you lead us to the end, I'm going to quickly go to David because I saw you had your hand up, and then we're going to head out to Tom.
Your graciousness, really, really appreciate it, Abigail. I want to recognize, without any qualification, the journey that you have shared with people like me that you're on. I am not in any way in denial of that story. The glass ceiling has to end.
So where's the apology?
Paul,
not apologized for it, David.
I am sorry.
Yeah. If you're part of it, then you should apologize.
He's not a part of it.
He's not, or he is?
He's not a part of it.
I'm part of the community. I'm part of the leadership that is perceived to, well, if we use the terminology you use, I have experienced white privilege. And that's a reality that I didn't go looking for. It happened. It happened. And I must accept, it's not, my church in times past has given me what you would describe as white privilege. I can't be in denial about that. I was, as Sam would have said, part of a smaller market of people that got certain positions. I hope I got it on merit, but I know that at times, both Sam and I know the story, we shared a role at one stage because of our ethnicity, okay? As I did with Des and as I did with Ray Allen and others. I accept that. That was the paradigm of the time. I believe things have to be different now. I have no qualms about that. I'm not. I recognise that reality, and I'm honestly in pain for the story of my brothers and sisters who, when they go out into the street or in the church, face a hurricane of disadvantage compared to any disadvantage I may have. That's reality. And I want to be part of the change process. Knowing how to navigate that as a church leader, I'm currently the editor of the National Church magazine. I invite you or anybody who's commented on here to have a voice in that magazine. There's some disillusionment in the comment section that we're going to leave this hanging again tonight, right?
I'm going to address that.
And I'm recognizing that. And I'm saying, if anybody who's commented there wants to have a voice in the National Church magazine, we are listening. I specifically have pages called A Time to Listen. And by listening to each other, like we're doing now, right? I'm hoping this is a tangible stage in taking us forward.
Thank you for the comments, David, and I appreciate that. Paul, I appreciate what you're saying as well. This is how I would like to. There's a lot of things we didn't touch on, but there's majority of things we did touch on. I've seen in the comments that this is going to be another nice conversation that leads to nothing. I don't want to think that, and Paul and I have spoken about this, Sam and I have spoken about this, Abigail and I've spoken about this, all of you. I do not want to think that we have spent the last however long it's been just having another AYS program. This is not an AYS program where we're just going to go off into the sunset and everything carries on. And so this is what I'm saying. I am not the master puppeteer. I don't have the powers to bring people to the table from everywhere. And so I'm pleading to my panelists and to anybody who's listening. We really need to have a similar conversation to this with people from the TED. They need to be in this environment for us to engage with them in this conversation, from the BUC also, for us to at least align in terms of where we could be going. And what I would also then like to do is to have a think tank of older, younger, and very much younger people to discuss what the future of leadership and the church could be in order to make us a relevant organization moving forward. There needs to be a lot of growth in terms of our culture changing and in terms of our professional growth to understand how that future could actually look like. Somebody in the comments, I believe it was Pastor Lolly Fontaine, said that the Bishop of Canterbury is not the line manager or the operational manager of the Church of England. There are roles and ways that the organization is delegated and broken up to ensure that the spirituality of the organization is dealt with as well as the business of the organization. And I think as uncomfortable as that may sound, millennials have been discussing this for a long time, and so have older members, about the need for our church to develop and evolve into a reality where we can have business leaders as well as spiritual leaders hand in hand leading the church forward. Another person made a fantastic comment, which is, you realize we have Adventist professionals in church as well. And I think that's a powerful point in order to address that kind of harmony that exists between the professional and the spiritual. We do have competent leaders in church who can do this work. It's about creating the framework of how we hire them, how we pay for their expertise, and how we then implement those changes into a broad range of policy changes to ensure that we have relevance moving forward. I want to be very clear. We don't have a church in the next 10 years unless we address these things. All of the people to whom we rely on for our tithing are going to be dead in the next 20 years. I'm sorry to sound morbid. I'm sorry to sound terrible, but that's the reality. And if we don't have a large cohort of millennials who are enthused about this work, enthused about this organization, and are prepared to take the gospel forward within the bounds of this organization, we simply do not have a church anymore. So this is not a case of the future of the church taking care of this later. We have to begin to address this today. Otherwise, we no longer have a church. And I think I would be distraught if this is just another nice conversation. And so back to my first point, I want us to do everything that we can, those who have been listening, those who are on the panel, to bring to account or to bring to the table those in higher echelons of leadership within our organization, to come and have this conversation at the table. I know Akil Henry has had discussions this week on his Facebook about having a think tank. I want to join hands with him in order to creating that, in the effort of creating that think tank, in order for us to begin to have an official body of recommendations from us, the youth, as well as the older members who align with our thinking, to be able to formally present some recommendations, as well as all of the skill sets that are required in order to make those recommendations a reality from within our ranks. I know many of you are professionals. I know many of you are competent. I know many of you are excellent people who have had industry knowledge and are now called into the work of the gospel. We need to create a framework where we can take advantage of your expertise and bring you to the table. And so I'm open to suggestions. Please reach out to myself and Abigail in how we can begin constructing this think tank and how we can create this white paper and how we can bring senior leadership to the table for this conversation to be had with them. I do not want this to just be another nice conversation where we say, oh, remember that time during that pandemic where Sam Davis and them man came onto the call and we had that conversation. That was nice. And then we just carry on. I don't want that to be the case. And so let's work towards that end. A lot of people have mentioned about the injustices towards women and the sexism that happens in church. We wanted to deal with that as a separate conversation. And so Val Bernard will be joining us again with another panel of fantastic thought leaders, female thought leaders, who will be leading that conversation. And we will be promoting that very shortly. I believe that will be taking place on the 20th, but we'll let you know more as 20th or 27th. We'll let you know more. 27th. We'll let you know more as that pans out. But we're going to have that conversation. And then we are going to begin an exciting new chapter of conversations, which is the African and Caribbean tensions that have existed in our churches and what the implications of that have been. We've got some fantastic speakers and panelists who are lined up for that to happen as well. But guys, this is not something that just me and Abigail and Anthony Fuller can sort out. We need all of you to get behind this in order for us to bring all levels of the organization to the table for the conversation and for all of us to put our minds together in order to figure out what the future of our church looks like. We are the church. We are no longer the future of the church. All of my mates are over 30. We're not the future of the church anymore. We are the church right now, and we need to begin acting like it. And so thank you, all of you, all 56, 60 of you, for your support in viewing this all the way through, for all of your amazing comments. They are going to inform future conversations and future work. Reach out to us. Think Tank, TED Leadership, Change. Let's make it happen. Panelists, I cannot thank you enough. Paul, thank you so much for being yourself and doing your thing. Adrian, thank you for doing the same. Sam, thank you. David, thank you. And Abigail, all of this wouldn't be possible without you. So thank you as well for this tag team championship situation that we've got going on here. To everyone listening, have a good evening. Sorry, we've taken up an extra hour of your time. The conversation was just too fire to let go of. And so we'll see you next time, 27th, I believe. Take care. God bless. Any closing remarks from Abigail?
No. Thanks as always, Tom, for leading us to the end.
No problem. Panelists, please remain. I'm going to take us off the broadcast. Please remain so we can have a quick debrief. Viewers, peace and love.